Okay, friends, lecture number 22. Beautiful day outside. In our previous lecture, we talked about the Wilmot Proviso. This was a proposal that did not pass, by the way, in which all land acquired from Mexico would have no restrictions on slavery. We went it through the 1848 presidential election. Old rough and ready Zachary Taylor was elected president. He's from Louisiana, by the way. And then we also mentioned an event that took place on the 24th of January, 1848, in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada Mountains on the South Fork of the American River, in which James Marshall discovered a nugget of gold. This is going to create the gold rush here. And we're all familiar with the 49ers. Somewhere through here, we also went through the Compromise of 1850. Do I have to go through that again? California will be admitted as a free state. All territory acquired from Texas will have no restrictions placed upon slavery. And a humma with that. It did not pass at first, and later it would pass, this time under a different president here. And by the way, before we get to that, we're going to see an array of new politicians here. The old politicians, John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, are going to slowly fade away. And new politicians such as Jefferson Davis, William H. Seward, and who else? Stephen A. Douglas, little giant, can't forget him, all 5'4" of him. When Zachary Taylor died on 9th of July in 1850, and in his final words, "I'm sorry, but I'm about to leave" here. He would be followed by Millard Fillmore, and that's where we get the passing of the Compromise of 1850. 1852 presidential election, Franklin Pierce was elected president. And once again, we had Stephen A. Douglas, a consummate politician, hard drinker, hard gambler, and he proposed this Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is literally going to tear our country apart and be the demise and lead to the demise of the Whig Party. It will be followed by the Republican Party, established in 1854. And I think in the closing parts of the class period, we talked about the border ruffians in Kansas. I mentioned to you about that vote that took place to establish a pro-slavery government in Kansas, followed by a free state government in Kansas here, and those three dramatic events that took place in Bleeding Canvas in May of 1856 here. We should all know what those are. The sacking of Lawrence. We also had the Potawatomi Massacre and the caning of Sumner that took place on the Senate floor. All right, so anyway, let's go back to our documents camera here, folks, and we have a lot to talk about here today. Let me get the lighting adjusted just right for you good folks here. And for many in our country, they viewed the South as the antithesis of democracy. And we still find this today, as a matter of fact, too. The South was, had by this time, had taken a hard position on the defense of slavery. The South was viewed by many Northerners as backward and lazy, dilapidated. Unfortunately, some Northerners still view the South as that. And if you stop and you think about the South here, what is the South faced with? We had John Brown, and that was at the Potawatomi Massacre here. We had William Lloyd Garrison, an abolitionist. Frederick Douglass, not to that extreme, though. Is that William Lloyd Garrison? I don't believe anyway. Uncle Tom's Cabin came out by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a slap in the face to Southern slave owners. And the amazing thing about it is that Harriet Beecher Stowe had only been south of the Mason-Dixon line on one occasion in her life. I don't think that makes her an expert, on Southern plantations and an authority on slavery. So that's what the situation that we have at that time. So this created a great amount of sectional tensions during this period. And what I want to do here, folks, we're going to move into our presidential election here of 1856. And like I said, there was a strong, belligerent defense of slavery by slave owners in the South. And we had an ever-growing, loud abolitionist movement coming out of the North. And so for both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, they tried to make an attempt to avoid controversial candidates. And the Democrats went with a man 65 years of age, a person by the name of James Buchanan. People referred to him as Old Buck or just Buck. Learn how to properly pronounce it. If we're down in the South, we pronounce that Buchanan. And if you're in the North, it's Buchanan. But anyway, James Buchanan, a bachelor, by the way, 65 years of age, I said a few seconds ago, and from Pennsylvania, by the way, from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, had been an ambassador to England. So while all this turmoil was taking place and the country was being torn apart in the early 1850s, he was out of the country. So he's a non-confrontational, a person that's not going to cause a problem here. And for the Republicans, and this is their first president presidential candidacy under this Republican Party will run as their candidate John C. Fremont, the Pathfinder. He'd been instrumental in settling the West and also in the Bear Flag Revolution, which California fell into the hands of the United States. Had a catchy little saying here, folks: free soil, free men, free speech, Fremont. I'd probably vote for somebody that had a campaign slogan like that, known as the Pathfinder. And the American Party, also known as the Know-Nothing Party, ran as their candidate Millard Fillmore. And this is kind of an interesting party here with the Know-Nothing Party, officially known as the American Party. They were all sworn to secrecy, so if anybody asked any workings of the party itself, inner workings, the reply would always be, I know nothing here. But they were anti-immigrant, anti-minority, just a very secretive group. You can see the election results here, folks. Did I write it down? And I believe I did here. If we look at James Buchanan, he had 174 electoral votes here. John Fremont had 114 votes. Millard Fillmore got the 8 votes. So you see who wins this presidential election here in 1856. And a bachelor will go to the White House here. He is our only bachelor president here. Let's see if I can find a likeness of him here. Here's old Buck right here. James Buchanan, that's what he looks like. And let's see here. I'm going to go back to my camera so I can show you a number of photographs here, or things that deal with James Buchanan. Here's a pamphlet here. Let's see if I can get it to get focused here. It looks like it's going to have a little challenge on that. But it tells you here, bachelor father and family man. Like I said, you know, he never married in his life. He's 65 years of age for the 3rd time today. And his home, located here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It is known as Wheatland, by the way. Sometimes that finds its way onto an examination bonus question here. I can get it properly aligned. As you know the rules on this, there is a charge for you to go through the house and take the tour. But if you go around to the back where the visitor center is, you can walk into the visitor center and you can do a couple of rooms in the house without having to pay for it. Another likeness here of James Buchanan, a hard drinker. I don't know if this is a favorable attribute, by the way, but it is said for James Buchanan that he could drink an exceptional amount of alcohol, never never stutter, never slur. Anyway, like I said, I don't know if that's a favorable characteristic or not, but his home was known as Wheatland. If you're up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, take the time to go by and visit there. All right, let's move right along, and I want to go into another topic here, and this is a complex subject. And I want you to do some deep thinking as we go through this and draw some of your own conclusions. And I want to introduce you to an individual by the name of Dred Scott. Now, Dred Scott is a slave. Here's a likeness there of Dred Scott. He's a slave. There's some historical information, data that leads us to believe that Dred Scott spent some time up in Florence, Alabama. And that's Dred Scott for you. All right, I'm going to leave his likeness right here, and you can see how to spell his name. And Dred Scott was from Missouri. Now, like I said, he was in Alabama for a period of time, and then he went to Missouri, and particularly in St. Louis. Let's get this over here so I can kind of hide some things away there. And the owner of Dred Scott was an Army surgeon, and this person's name is John Emerson, Dr. John Emerson. And Dr. John Emerson was an Army surgeon, so this meant that he's in the Army, he has to travel around. Now, Missouri is a slave state. Dred Scott is in Missouri. He's in St. Louis. But Dr. John Emerson, and I think he's a decent guy, by the way, and Dr. John Emerson was given orders transferring him across the river, and I'm talking about the Mississippi River, over into Illinois. And if I can remember when I go back to my map here, I'll show you where Rock Island, Illinois is. That's where a military base is present, and it's my understanding there's still a contingency of military personnel present at Rock Island, Illinois. And so Dr. John Emerson carried Dred Scott with him to Illinois. Well, Illinois is a free state, and slavery is not permitted in Illinois. So what happens to the status of Dred Scott? I want you to think about that a little bit. Is Dred Scott still a slave, or is Dred Scott now a free man. And a couple of years after that, then Dr. John Emerson, the Army surgeon, was transferred up to Wisconsin. And I'll let you use your own knowledge of U.S. geography to envision where that is. Wisconsin at that time was not a state. Wisconsin was a territory. But according to the Missouri Compromise, slavery is not permitted in Wisconsin territory. And this time, Dr. John Emerson went to a place which is called Fort Snelling, which is an active military installation today. So I'm going to ask you again here, class, what is the status here to Dred Scott? Is he a slave, or is he now a free man? And it was also at that time that Dred Scott took a wife. All right, I'll go back to my camera here, and the wife that he took was Harriet, and Harriet Scott. And the two of them together had children. Okay, so there we go. We have Dred Scott and we have Harriet. They have two children. And are those children free or are they not? It was actually John Emerson, being nice as he was, actually purchased Harriet. And he purchased Harriet so that she could be Dred Scott's wife and travel with Dred Scott. All right, so that's the situation that we have here, folks. And then John Emerson went back to St. Louis, which is back in Missouri, a slave state. So what's the status now for Dred Scott, Harriet, and those children? Well, Dr. Emerson died. And when he died, Dred Scott and Harriet became the possessions or property, if you will, of the wife of John Emerson. But she really had no interest in this, and so she turned over custody of Dred Scott to a man by the name, well, it was actually her brother by the name of John Sanford, J-F-A Sanford, and that's the way it is properly spelled here, S-A-N-F-O-R-D. And the transfer of title here crossed state lines, so that allowed it to be now brought into a federal court. Okay, now before this, Dred Scott filed for his, and he was convinced to do this, he was talked into doing this, to file for his freedom in the state of Missouri. And he did. And the Missouri lower courts awarded Dred Scott his freedom, made him a free man. But it went to appeal to the Supreme Court in Missouri, and Dred Scott once again lost his case. But now, by going into a federal, crossing of federal lines, it now becomes a Supreme Court decision here. And by the way, that old courthouse in St. Louis, which is right below the Gateway Arch, by the way, as you can see it right here, that's the old courthouse here in St. Louis. I recommend that you go there. It's a fun place. You go up onto the second floor of the courthouse, and the entire second floor is dedicated to a museum for Dred Scott. Let's see if I have some other information here about that. Here's a brochure that's looking at the ceiling, looking at the dome from the interior anyway, and talking about the old courthouse there in St. Louis. All right, so it made its way to the Supreme Court, and presiding over the Supreme Court was one of our old friends. I'm going to turn the camera back to me so that you can see this here. Was one of our old friends that you have met before here, folks. This individual right here, his name is Roger B. Taney. Roger Brooke Taney. You have heard me talk about him before in Jackson's Bank War. Here's a likeness of him right here. This is a statue that's right outside of the Maryland State House in Maryland. State House was located in Annapolis, Maryland. You know, so he's a very well-known individual. He's from Maryland. Maryland was a slave state, if I can get this right for you good folks here. And if you travel to the northern parts of Maryland, you can actually go to a town called Taneytown that's named for him. This other individual, which is over here, is Charles Sumner. I was telling you about the other day. He was one that was caned on the Senate floor in May of 1856 by Preston Brooks, who was a representative from South Carolina. Okay, so anyway, let me catch you back up here, folks, and we're going to go back to our camera here, and let's see what else we have here. So let's update ourselves a little bit here as we go into Roger B. Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the United States. He's from Maryland. The Chief Justice, I should say the Supreme Court at that time was composed of 9 justices. 7 of those justices were from the South, and 2 of the justices were from the north. So if you stop and you think about this, is this a level playing field? Well, you'll have to draw your own conclusions with that. All right, now there were multiple decisions that came out of this from the Supreme Court. Let me try to contrast this a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. And I want you to think about each of these clauses as I read through these for you. Dred Scott is not a citizen of Missouri. nor is he a citizen of the United States, and therefore he cannot bring a suit against the United States government. And that was in Part 1. All right, the Supreme Court ruled further with this. Dred Scott's travels in the North do not affect his status as a slave. Slaves are property. And if we look at Part 3 with this, Congress cannot take property without due process of law. And if we go into the final part of this here, Congress cannot pass a law depriving persons of their slave property in any of the territories. Bottom line, therefore, the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional. So, did Dred Scott win his case? Dred Scott did not win his case. Dred Scott lost his case. As it turned out, Dred Scott was granted his freedom, and this was done by Mr. Sanford, and Dred Scott lives as a free man. If I remember right, I think it was for 15 months as a free man, and then he died here. Today, if you wish to do so, you can travel to, let me see if I got to, it's Calvary Cemetery. It's Calvary Cemetery that's present right outside of St. Louis, by the way. Any of you good folks ever heard the name of Ferguson, Missouri? You probably remember Ferguson, Missouri from, I believe it was 2014, which Michael Brown was killed in the streets there. And it's just created just days and days of rioting. There's still problems there in Ferguson, Missouri to this very day. But if you visit there, you can, and I don't recommend that you do that, by the way. You know, it's let's let things cool off a little bit longer anyway. But if you visit there, take the time to go out to Calvary Cemetery. You'll find the burial site to Dred Scott here. This is his wife Harriet, who is buried over there. Not too far from there, you'll find the burial site of William Tecumseh Sherman that we'll be talking about next week, a Northern general. And Tennessee Williams, the playwright Tennessee Williams, is also buried right there in that cemetery. So a lot of history associated with that. Okay, so let's move into a different area here, folks. I've already had it on the screen so that you can take a look at it. I want to mention not the presidential election, but let's talk about the congressional election that's going to take place in 1858. It's a very important election. It involves the Senate race that will take place in Illinois. Now, the incumbent senator in Illinois, and a very popular individual, is Stephen A. Douglas, a little giant. The gambler, the hard drinker, vote it up, vote it down. It makes no difference. Just give the people the opportunity to vote. Quite popular individual. But he was challenged by another individual who's not known very well. A man known for his honesty. Supposedly he was split rails. You know what I'm talking about with that. And this person's name is Abraham Lincoln. All right. Now, to gain a little face time, notoriety, Abraham Lincoln challenged Mr. Douglas to a series of debates, and these debates, which are called the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and there will be 7 open-air debates all around Illinois here. And for each of these candidates, they mistakenly tried to present the opponent there, as being something they're not. And for Stephen A. Douglas, he tried to portray Abraham Lincoln as a free stater, as a person that was an abolitionist, and that was just not the case with Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln always believed that whites and blacks would never be able to live and work together with equality with that. What Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans wanted was to restrict any more states from becoming slave states. Just keep slavery where it is and let it just kind of burn its way out, and it probably would have in the next 20 or 30 years. And for the Lincoln side, they always tried to present Stephen A. Douglas, as a pro-slaver. And that was just not the case with either one of them. And I cannot tell you who won all of these debates. Out of the 7 debates there, it was pretty well equally split here. Let me show you a likeness here. Times here of the Lincoln-Douglas debate. The one with his finger pointing right here is Stephen A. Douglas, a little giant. And, of course, Abraham Lincoln here. It doesn't look much like the photographs that you see of Abraham Lincoln, but that's a very youthful Abraham Lincoln. And if I get a chance, I'll show you some photographs of Abraham Lincoln later in the class period. All right, I want to go back here and let me pick up another photograph here and show you those 2 individuals there. Abraham Lincoln, of course, is over on this side. Seems like I'd get used left or right here. And then Stephen A. Douglas is on this side right there. But the amazing thing about it here is during this election, and this is for the Senate position here, as Stephen Douglas won that congressional election, won that senatorial election here. But the one thing about Abraham Lincoln had got a little FaceTime with the people. He now becomes a name, and people will recognize that name. And don't forget him. He's going to come back, along with Stephen A. Douglas, too. All right, so let's go back to our camera here, and shall we move right along. And another event's going to take place here, folks, and it involves our old friend here of John Brown. Now, John Brown, this was a person that was instrumental in the Pottawatomie Massacre that took place in May of 1856. Let me show you what he looks like here. Here's John Brown. This is a youthful likeness here of John Brown. His favorite biblical verse was Hebrews 9:22, and if you look that up, it will be something to the effect like there can be no forgiveness of sins without bloodshed. So, in other words, he is a bloodthirsty individual. All right, now I'm going to take John Brown off here and show you a likeness of John Brown. This is about the time of 1859, anyway. Don't you think he looks like a Moses? I think probably you would agree with me on that. He's like an Old Testament prophet here, John Brown. And John Brown had 4 sons, I believe it was anyway, and they were all as bloodthirsty as John Brown, and they were all abolitionists. Now, what John Brown planned to do here, he was going to stage a raid, and this raid would take place at Harpers Ferry, Virginia. Now, before anybody counters me on that and says, well, wait a minute, Harpers Ferry is now in West Virginia. It is in West Virginia, but at the time we're talking about here, Harpers Ferry was present in Virginia itself. And on the 16th of October in 1859, John Brown, with 18 followers, and some of his sons, there were 13 whites, there were 5 blacks, and they staged a raid on Harpers Ferry. Now, why would you attack Harpers Ferry? In Harpers Ferry, there's a federal arsenal that is present there. And so what John Brown was planning to do, he and his followers there would take over that arsenal, bring it into their own hands there, and then they would take the weapons that were that were being housed there, being kept there, and then use those weapons to provide blacks and free blacks and supporting whites with these weapons and stage a slave revolt across the country here. Now, here's what Harpers Ferry looks like here. It hasn't changed a lot here, folks. I've got a lot of photographs to show you this, but this is Harpers Ferry. The big river that you're seeing there is out of the Potomac River. Don't be surprised when you go there today. If you travel there in the summer months anyway, you'll see a lot of people floating the Potomac in inner tubes. It's very popular. We don't do that in the South too much because we have so many cottonmouths and copperheads that are down in the water. Now, where the city is, the city itself is, let me get this here where I can look at it. The city itself is down in this region here. And where that arsenal was, let's see if I can see it here. The arsenal, well, that's it right there. You can see the arsenal, which is present there, and you can't tell very much about it here. We've got a railroad that runs through there. There's a railroad tunnel. You know, it's always it's an interesting place to visit. I've always been too afraid to go into the railroad tunnel because I'm afraid there'd be a train coming through and there'd be no way to get out. Okay, let me share a few more photographs with you here. This is from Harpers Ferry today. I don't even know if you've heard of it. Notice the bridge that's in the background there, and that provides a connection there between West Virginia and Virginia. But anyway, it's like Gatlinburg, and you know where Southerners, we go to Gatlinburg to vacation, you know, mountain retreat here, and up in the areas of Washington D.C., this is where people go, and it's a neat place to visit here. I recommend that you go there. I'm going to go back to my camera right here and let you see a few more photographs here of Harpers Ferry. All right, here's a smaller one here. It's one I showed you a few seconds ago in an enlarged version there. The arsenal is not there today. It's a train depot. And for John Brown's men, when they went in, the first person they killed was actually a black man. He was a free black, and they killed that individual. And why they did that, I have no clue whatsoever there. And later, a statue was erected to this guy. He was Sullivan, and it upset a lot of people, and they felt like it was not culturally correct here for free black to be the guy that was killed by John Brown's followers, and so the demands were made to remove that statue, and they did. The first one of John Brown's followers that was killed was Dangerfield Newby, and he was a black man and had been a slave, and black man. Somebody cut off his ears and kept them for souvenirs, and I've tried to find where the those ears went today, and I've been unsuccessful in doing that. And what John Brown was suspecting here, folks, he thought that the townspeople would rise up and support him, and they did not. In fact, for John Brown's men, they were physically attacked themselves. They took refuge in what was, it was a fire engine house. That's what it looks like today anyway. It's a fire engine house. It has, it's a high ceiling, but there's no upstairs to it anyway. And it's run by the National Park Service today, as much of the old section of Harpers Ferry is run by the National Park Service. Let's see if I can make that a little bit better. This is what it looks like. It looked like at that time. The fire engine house is over here. That's right there. And that's where they got inside. John Brown's followers got inside and boarded up the doors so that so they could protect themselves the best they could. I need to go back to my camera here. Well, I'm already back on it here, folks. And the Army was called out, because what we have here, we have an armed insurrection. They broke into a federal arsenal there. And the Army was called out. They were led by Colonel Robert E. Lee. You probably recognize the name there. Assisted by a young lieutenant by the name of Jeb Stuart. And nonetheless, here, folks, to make this a short story, for John Brown, the end was in sight here, and the Army actually battered the door of the fire engine house down and entered inside, killed 10 of John Brown's followers. John Brown was wounded, but he was not killed, and they took the rest of them in custody here. Good article if you were in class here. I would have this out for you, showing a likeness there of John Brown at Harpers Ferry here. And John Brown was taken to about 7 miles away to a nearby town which is called Charlestown. You can go there today. That's like the county courthouse, and that's where he was tried. He was tried in the courts here, tried for treason, and not treason against the United States. He was tried for treason against Virginia. And you can actually go to that courthouse today if you wish to do so. And you can see in this artist rendering here, this is John Brown, who is descending the steps there of the courthouse after he's been sentenced to death, along with 6 of his other followers there. And notice he is embracing and kissing a young infant there. You have Virginia soldiers there that are providing security for him, and he was taken down and placed in a wagon. If you can imagine cruel and unusual punishment, he was put in a wagon along with the other followers. Each one had their separate wagons, and he had to sit on his own coffin and to be carried out to the gallows there. So you're sitting on that coffin, you look down, and you think, well, this is going to be my final resting place in just a few minutes. And John Brown and his followers were all hanged. They're buried today. Some of them are buried in mass graves up in New Elba, New York. By the way, it's up near the Hudson River, a little bit north of Albany, wherever. Okay, so anyway, and that was John Brown and John Brown's raid. So another thing that's going to serve to divide the country here, my friends. In the north, John Brown is held as a martyr. In the south, John Brown is just a terrible barbaric person with that. All right, so anyway, it's a fun place to visit, Harpers Ferry. I would recommend that you work that into your schedule here, folks. Let's see if I have anything I need to tie up here, wrap up here. Charleston, Virginia, tried for treason. Let's see what else I might have put down here. And anyway, that's enough on John Brown, by the way. Okay, so let's move on here, folks. We've got a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time to go through this. So let's move through our presidential election of 1860. It's the most consequential election in United States history, and the country is literally torn apart. It's like our country today in 2020. We are literally torn apart. And the same thing held true here in the presidential election of 1860. And for the Democrats held their convention in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Democrats just could not come together. It's kind of like the Democratic Party today. They just could not get a consensus of opinion here. And so what happens here is they literally just walked out of the conference here. Never chose a candidate, and they decided they would convene at another time up in Baltimore, Maryland. And once again, they just could not come to a conclusion, and Southern Democrats and Northern Democrats split. And so what they ended up doing here is for this ND right here, that's ND, is Northern Democrats. So Northern Democrats nominated Stephen A. Douglas. So Stephen A. Douglas is a Northern Democratic candidate, and for Southern Democrats, they went with John C. Breckinridge. John C. Breckinridge is from Kentucky. He's actually Vice President of the United States, by the way, later be a Confederate general. But he was the Vice President of the United States, and he was nominated as a Southern Democrat candidate. Now, folks, I'm not going to go back to me because I'll have to go back to the documents camera here below in just a second. But I want you to imagine that. Do you know the best way to lose a presidential election? Can you tell me the best way to lose a presidential election? You split your candidates. You split your candidates. You split the Democrats here, Northern Democrats, Southern Democrats, and it is an absolute guarantee you will lose that election if you do so. And capitalizing on this were the Republicans. And the Republicans came in and nominated Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. And yet again, we had another candidate, a constitutional union candidate by the name of John Bell. John Bell. He'd been a prominent politician, by the way. He's from Tennessee. So let's take a look at our four candidates here, and we can see Abraham Lincoln up here. Here's John Breckinridge over on this side here. And this is John Bell, and this is Stephen A. Douglas, which is president down there. Those are our four candidates. Now, one of the things I enjoy about teaching here, folks, is my students bring me things. They bring me old historical things. And one of my students a number of years ago brought me this article. It's actually a letter. And when the student handed me this letter, they handed me the original letter. Now, I made a photocopy. That person was nice enough to let me photograph this. And if you look at the top here, it gives you the date here, and it's very, very poorly written. And the person had a real writing problem, spelling problem, too. But it's September the 2nd, 1860. September the 2nd, 1860. So we are right on the verge of having that presidential election of 1860. This is from Lawrence County, Arkansas. So it's a southern state. And I'm just having to do this from memory here, folks, but he goes through the start of the letter here, up in this area here, where he's telling about wheat prices and the price of corn. It's present there. He mentions that there's a little bit of scarlet fever that is present. And then he gets down to the bottom here, and this is where it's really important, right in this area where my finger's pointing there. And he says, there's great excitement in this area of Arkansas. Everybody is concerned about this presidential election. And he even says there is three candidates here in Arkansas. We have Stephen A. Douglas, we have John Bell, and we have the candidate from Kentucky. It slipped out of my mind. I don't know how I missed that here, folks. John C. Breckinridge. And nowhere is there the mention of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln did not even make his name did not even get his name on the ballot in Arkansas. So that's just a crazy, crazy situation that we have. So anyway, John C. Breckinridge, my apologies to him for having that slip out of my mind. So let's go back to our camera here, folks, and let's take a look at the election results in this election here of 1860. All right, I wrote it out for you so you can kind of get an appreciation for this. All right, if you can't read my writing, that's electoral votes here. We look over on this side, this is popular votes. And for Stephen A. Douglas, he had 12 electoral votes, 29% of the popular votes. Breckinridge had 72 electoral votes, 18 popular votes. And Abraham Lincoln had 180 electoral votes and 40% of the popular votes. John Bell, 39 electoral votes, 12 in the popular vote here. All right, so it was clear cut. The Electoral College is what determines our presidency, and that's where our Constitution is written, and that's the way it should remain here, folks. But if we look at this, Abraham Lincoln wins the Electoral College, but he does not win the popular vote if we had not split the Democratic Party. The Democrat vote here from Northern Democrat and Southern Democrat would have been 47% of the vote. And of course, the popular vote influences the electoral vote. So by splitting the Democratic vote here of Northern Democrat, Southern Democrat, this allowed Mr. Lincoln to sweep in and win this presidential election. All right, so quite interesting here. And I'll show you some likenesses here. We're about to get into the Civil War here, folks. And I want to show you a likeness here of Abraham Lincoln here. And this was taken in 1860, about the time that he was elected president here. 1860, follow along with me. And then we're going to start the Civil War itself. And by the way, Abraham Lincoln received a letter from a 12-year-old girl. And she said, Mr. President, I think you would look more distinguished if you would grow a beard. And sure enough, he grew a beard. So we'll see the transition here of Mr. Lincoln here. And this is after he year in office, something like that. And I want you to watch what happens to him in the course of the next 4 years. And that's Abraham Lincoln, 4 years after that first photograph was taken. I know the presidency, well, it takes its toll on an individual, and I think you all agree with me that it took the toll on Abraham Lincoln likewise. Okay, so let's move on here, folks. We have completed that chapter, and I want to take a few minutes. We're going to go into our next chapter here. And for Southern fire eaters, that was the last straw. Let's get back here. For Southern fire eaters, that is the absolute last straw. Hang on a second. I'll get things back together here, folks. So anyway, rumors of secession will take place. I wrote this out so that you would know exactly how to spell this. To succeed, a lot of people misspell this. A lot of people misspell it. But see how we spell secession there? And I'm looking around for something. I was going to show you something here. And so we'll go down through the sequence of this here, folks. On December 20th in 1860, you don't have to know the dates here, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. And not too long after that, the second state to secede from the Union will be Mississippi, January the 9th in 1861. And on the next day, we find that Florida will become the third state to secede from the Union, January the 10th. And shortly after that, Alabama becomes the fourth state. Let's see if I can get all of these down here. In fact, I'll just take that out of the way here. And Alabama becomes the fourth state. Georgia becomes the fifth state, January 19th. Louisiana, sixth state, January 26th, 1861. Texas becomes the seventh state, February the 1st, 1861. And that becomes the Confederate States of America. There are 7 original Confederate States of America. And I shared this with my class here, folks. And this is a reprint of an article. It was on February the 18th in 1861. I'm trying to find the top of the article, and I don't guess I have to. What you're looking at right there, that's the old State House at Montgomery, Alabama. And it tells you here that Jefferson Davis was inaugurated on that date. If you go up to the top of the steps there to this very day, and I think all kids and school kids in Alabama have done so, but if you go up to the top there, you can find a little bronze plaque, bronze star that's embedded down into the marble here at the top of the steps, and it'll say something to the effect like Honorable Jefferson Davis was inaugurated February 18th in 1861. And if you read into the article even more so, it tells you, about on this date here, the Honorable Jefferson Davis was inaugurated president of the provisional government of the Confederate States of America. Ladies waved handkerchiefs, cannons fired in celebration, whistles blew from factories, shops, and steamboats, military companies from Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi marched. I've never before or since that hour ever experienced an ecstasy of patriotism, said one person anyway. Okay, I want to go back to my camera here. And let's look in the background here, folks. And I've outlined for you, good folks, here, the 7 states here that seceded from the Union. South Carolina first, of course, here. Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. Kind of like an SEC lineup, if you ask me here, folks. So those were the states that succeeded from the Union. Okay, the 7 states originally, anyway. Okay, let's move on for a second here, folks. And at that time, I want to remind you, and I'm not going to go into Fort Sumter today because we're just about out of time here, but I want to remind you who was president of the United States when all of this takes place. And the president at that time is James Buchanan. Abraham Lincoln has been elected president, but he has not been inaugurated. And so it is James Buchanan. And James Buchanan is no Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is not going to allow the South to secede from the Union. And they will use military force to force the South to remain as part of the United States of America. But James Buchanan felt like that the federal government was powerless to stop this. All right, now, before we close here, folks, in the South, federal arsenals, federal offices were all just taken over by the Confederacy. It was not a difficult transition. What it was is you just simply changing your hats. You were loyal to the United States, now you're loyal to the Confederacy. There were 2 forts, however, that failed to fall into Southern hands. One of the forts is called Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter, which is present in Charleston, South Carolina, out in the harbor at at Charleston. And next time we get together, I'll tell you a lot about Fort Sumter. The other fort was at Fort Pickens. Now, Fort Pickens is down in Pensacola. It's at Santa Rosa Island. Some of you probably have been down there. Maybe have taken the opportunity to go through Fort Pickens. It's kind of like what we have in Alabama with Fort Gaines and Fort Morgan here. All right, my friends, I think that's a pretty good stopping point for us for today anyway. When we come in the next time, we're going to be talking about the American Civil War. And I'm going to try to be fair to you folks on this. Honestly, I could teach an entire course on the American Civil War, and there's so much material with it. Now, I know some people don't care about, wars and battles, so I'm going to try to just go right down the middle of the line and talk a little bit about it, but not too much about it anyway, and just try to make it quite interesting for you. But next time we get together, that's pretty much what we're going to be doing, is going through campaigns, battles, engagements, comparing the North and the South and their strengths and that sort of thing. Okay, thank you very much. Stay up with the material now here, folks. All right, thanks.